Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony Swinton, and I attend Clayton State University. And in my reading review vlog, I'll be reviewing the book Until I Am Free, written by Dr. Keisha N. Blaine. Now, the author's background is she's a professor. She does have a strong academic background. She's also a historian. She focuses on African American history, and in this book, she focuses on the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a black woman that was a powerful civil rights activist. Um, the way that Keisha narrates the events and adds historical facts, um, it helps reminds the reader that we're still fighting for justice today, right? That's what I got out of it. Now, to talk about some historical context and storyline, Keisha helps introduce Fannie Hammer by highlighting some of her major contributions during her fight against racism, voter suppression, poverty, and gender inequality. Keisha Blaine helps the reader learn more about how Black women helped shape American democracy during the Civil Rights Movement era. The storyline of the book is back in the 1960s during that civil rights movement era time, right? And she focuses on Fannie Hammer's activism journey, where Fannie, shares a lot of her life experiences, the historical political battles, different interviews and speeches that she was giving, as well as research on sharecroppers. Um, Hammer was actually a sharecropper and then she was turned activist. She's from Mississippi, that's where she was born, and she experienced a lot of the stuff that she fought for, like poverty and brutal beatings and racial segregation and voter suppression, all while still fighting for justice. Keisha Blaine included recent movements in history, such as Black Lives Matter, um, some Kamala Harris political conferences, Megan the Stallion situations, as well as some Me Too movements, to help point out how Hammer's topics of freedom and faith and equality are still relevant today, right? So during this time, or during the time back in the 1960s, in 1965, there was a Voting Rights Act that was supposed to allow all people, including blacks, the right to vote. And this law was actually updated in the Constitution, a part of the 15th Amendment. However, blacks were still denied voting privileges and they were lynched just for attempting to register to vote. Um, what I thought was interesting was how the lynching of Emmett Till, um, was highlighted in the book. But in 1970s, about 1973, the suspected white murderers of Till actually moved to Hamer's hometown in Mississippi, right? So just to kind of jump to some key highlights, in 1962, Hamer attended a civil rights organization meeting at a church in Sunflower County, Mississippi. And she attended that to encourage other blacks to register to vote. This meeting was hosted by the NSCC, which is the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee. And that's actually where Hammer learned that she had voter rights, right? After joining the movement, Hammer worked to help coordinate voter education workshops as well as marches, and she participated in sit ins. She also described how blacks experience racist violence on daily basis during those meetings, right? She shared some of her stories, like her home being shot up, right? Brutal beatings that she experienced in jail and death threats that she received on a daily. Um, but she still was able to, you know, have love in her heart. So a quote that I'll read is, um, "Freedom is in my soul and love is in my heart." And she believed that even after all of the things that she went through. Now, some of the impact that the book had. So the book, Until I Am Free, um, you know, I feel like it had a tremendous impact. It helped connect past and present challenges described uh, in society, in the past and in the present, right? There also was a quote introduced by Hamer, and um, it goes, "Nobody's free until everybody is free." And the author Blaine feels like that still applies today. Um, that quote really makes the reader think about whether we are all really free in America, right? Um, so it gets the reader to realize, we must keep working on being free in America, because if everybody isn't free, then you're not free. Some historical turning points, I would say, would be the work described in the 1960s, with Hammer and the SNCC. They had workshops that helped inform blacks of their voter rights while exposing racism and white supremacy at the same time. During those workshops, blacks learned about how they have certain rights protected under the U.S. Constitution, specifically in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, but they weren't granted those rights, right? Also in 2020, Blaine talks about the Democratic National Convention with Kamala Harris, and Kamala gave credit to Hammer's influence on shaping U.S. history, in that we all must work together. And that she picked up the torch, and we should do the same and continue fighting. um, so Harris did reference some of Hammer's political ideology and quotes, which I thought was pretty neat, right? Now, some sentiments that the author covered in the work, of Hammer are connected, I believe, to issues we still face today. A lot of the racial challenges from white supremacy faced in the 60s and 70s, still continue to shape Black culture today, right? Because some of us still encounter inequality and racism in the United States. This was discussed when the author, Keisha, brought up police brutality cases with Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Philando Castile, right? And many more, right? She also mentioned the lack of food and jobs, which is something we still suffer from today. There's a lot of people unemployed, and just recently, EBT was cut off, right? So some other important perspectives in the book, was how the U.S. Constitution prohibits acts of violence and intimidation on all Americans, which is supposed to include blacks, right? The 15th Amendment also granted that every U.S. citizen has the ability to vote, and that was added to the Constitution way back in the 1870s, right? So Hammer made some great points when she stated, and now it's 64 and they're still trying to keep us away from the ballot, right? She had a tell it like it is political strategy, that is still powerful in today's society as it pertains to white state sanctioned violence that happened then and continues to happen now. Um, Keisha compared several recent police brutality scenarios involving black women and men losing their life after encounters with law enforcement, which really is no different than the fear of being lynched in today's, in society back then, right? And we're no longer in the Jim Crow era, but it's still happening. Another alternative perspective to consider is when, blacks discovered the right to vote. It didn't just mean that they had the ability to fill out a ballot. Um, it exposed long time history of being limited to formal education, and empowered blacks as actual U.S. citizens, right? So allowing blacks to help shape society and politics at all levels, um, was something that was tremendous. And I'll go over a quote, that kind of helps with that. hands that pick cotton now pick public officials. I thought that was pretty interesting. So, since I'm on the quotes, I do want to go over some interesting passages. So, for 300 years, she explained, we've given them, white people, time. And I've been tired so long, she continued. Now I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. We want to change a society in America, she added. Um, Hammer's speech in 1967, where she also quoted, we have a long fight, and this fight is not mine alone, she explained. But you are not free, whether you are white or black, until I am free, because no man is an island to himself. And until I am free in Mississippi, you are not free in Washington. You are not free in New York. I felt like those were some very powerful passages, right? Now, to talk about cause and effect, the book addresses themes of change and continuation, right, over time. An example would be when Hammer described how in America we're promised to be free, equality and justice for all, right? But in reality, we weren't free and we aren't free. No one's free, not even whites, until all Americans in society are free without constraints, right? So, another cause and effect example would be Hammer's quote, we want leaders. And Hammer explained how regular people like herself can be leaders. Following this, Keisha spoke on tragedy involving Black women, such as Breonna Taylor, right? As recent as in 2020, where one of the activists, who is now a leader, right, helped launch a campaign that eventually attracted others to Taylor's tragedy. That campaign, it started with that that lady's inner circle and expanded to celebrities digitally, online, and it brought in millions of dollars to Taylor's family and police reforms, and it outlawed no knock warrants and required the use of body cameras in searches, right? So some of the text's shortcomings, silences, or omissions, you would say, I would say would be the lack of information and influence from other white activists, I'm sorry, other women activists mentioned in the book. The book focuses mainly on Hammer, right, and briefly mentions other women activists being around, but it didn't really speak on the other women's accolades. Um, and so, those are some of the shortcomings that I got out of the book, which, isn't a lot. The book, you know, had a lot of powerful things mentioned in it. So, those shortcomings have nothing, it doesn't take away from the learnings that, I got in that book. I hope you guys enjoyed my reading vlog. It's one of the first vlogs I've ever done. And so, again, my name is Ebony Swinton from Clayton State, and I hope you enjoyed.